When is the best time to cold plunge? That's a question a lot of cold plungers ask themselves. And if you Google or go online, you see a lot of conflicting information like, cold plunge after exercise to reduce inflammation, and don't cold plunge after exercise because it's going to negatively impact your muscle gains, and anything in between. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the context that's required as part of this conversation and why timing matters in some cases and why it doesn't really matter. And so hopefully by the end of this video, you know exactly when is the right time to cold plunge for you, because that might be different than when is the best time for me. Before we get into this, let me know what type of cold plunge do you have? I want to know brand and product. I'm always curious to see what people are using out there and how they like it. So let me know. And with that, we're gonna get into some of the timings. But at the end of the day, the timing is really dependent on the benefit that you'd like to get out of cold plunging. There are a number of reasons why people cold plunge, from reducing inflammation to improving athletic performance, improving recovery, improving immunity, trying to avoid getting sick, improving sleep, improving or lowering stress, improving stress management, and anything in between. So there are a lot of reasons, and those reasons really drive or should drive the decision of when you should cold plunge and when it's likely better to avoid it. And let's start with a very simple case, and that is boosting energy. If you want to get a jolt of energy, then I would recommend cold plunge first thing in the morning. You don't need coffee, you don't need an energy drink, just getting into the cold, into ice cold water, maybe submerging your head, that's gonna wake you up. And really anytime when you feel like, maybe the afternoon slump, you feel like you need like a little boost or something, instead of grabbing coffee and then negatively impacting your sleep because the caffeine lingers, why don't just jump into the cold and get an immediate boost, a sustainable boost of energy that's likely gonna last you for a couple of hours. So energy, whenever you need it, or first thing in the morning, my recommendation. If you wanna boost athletic performance and maybe even boost your testosterone levels, especially for men, then my recommendation is to cold plunge before exercise. And I know this sounds counterintuitive, but there is a lot of research suggesting that by pre-cooling your mitochondria, the mitochondria are those little power plants that we all have in all of our cells, and they produce energy, right? In the form of ATP, which is our energy currency. And so if you want to improve energy production, then one of the things you can do is to cool your mitochondria, to cool those power plants down a little bit so they don't overheat as quickly when you exercise, because you fatigue. One of the reasons why you fatigue when you exercise, doesn't really matter if it's endurance or weightlifting or whatever, is because your mitochondria gets too hot, and so it needs to cool down. It's kind of like the iPhone. If you're out in the sun too much, then your iPhone might say, hey, nothing works because it needs to cool down before it can continue operating. The same principle applies kind of to your mitochondria. And so by pre-cooling a mitochondria, you have a little bit more leeway before you overheat. That's one reason. The second reason is that studies have also shown that if you pre-cool your mitochondria and then you start exercising, and by exercising, I mean just warming up or going for a brisk walk. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get out of the cold and immediately start deadlifting 500 pounds and maybe get injured because you're not warmed up. But by just doing something right after exposing yourself to ice cold temperatures, your testosterone production increases. And so if that's your goal, cold plunge before exercise. And that's usually what I do. Before going CrossFit, I jump into the cold, I towel off, I put on my clothes, and I go right to workout and start warming up. If your goal is to improve your cognitive performance, your resilience, your mental strength, then I would argue cold plunge whenever you feel it's the most inconvenient time at the most difficult time. Obviously, there is again nuance to that. Don't make it so difficult that you end up not doing it. But for example, in winter, when it's freezing cold out here and I have to kind of, come down with a jacket and then undress, strip down to my trunks and jump into the cold, that for me is the most difficult way of cold plunging, but the most beneficial one to increase my mental strength and my even the cognitive performance to a degree, because it's so incredibly difficult that I feel like if I accomplish that, I can accomplish anything. If I can strip down to my trunks when it's freezing outside to jump into freezing cold water, that's one of the most difficult things that I've been doing, and it has really helped me to become stronger mentally. If your goal is to improve your immunity, to support your immune system, timing, I would argue, doesn't really matter. Just get into the cold and stay in there long enough for your body to release those so-called cold shock proteins. Your body's response to incredibly cold temperatures. So for those, you probably want to be on the lower end of the temperature. There are probably not going to be a whole lot of cold shock proteins being released as part of your immune response if you're in water at 60 degrees cold. So water temperature and time in the cold are more important than timing. Just do it anytime and you'll get the benefits. Again, assuming your water is cold enough and you stay in long enough, meaning probably more than 2 minutes. For cardiovascular health, if that's your goal, then I would also argue the timing is not super important, but the pairing with cold is important. And I guess that's a good time now to introduce the sponsor of this video, Sweat Tent. They make, as the name implies, a sauna tent that comes with a wood stove that heats the inside of that tent up to 240 degrees in only 30 minutes. It's one of my favorite ways of sauna bathing because it's so quick. You get the real wood stove experience from a finished sauna, and it tops out at 240 degrees. That's just incredibly hot. Pair this with adding some water over the sauna rocks to get the humidity up, and you get an incredible sauna session out of that. And we have this here in our backyard, the Sweat Tent. And pairing that, the Sweat Tent, then with cold plunging, that's really the best way to work on to improve my cardiovascular health, because you get the vasodilation, the expansion of blood vessels in the Sweat Tent because of the heat, and then the vasoconstriction, meaning your blood vessels shrink down again in response to the cold. And if you do this back and forth maybe 2 or 3 times, that's an excellent workout for my entire cardiovascular system, for my heart. You get the heart pumping in the sauna. It slows down then again here in the cold. And that's really, again, not necessarily related to timing, but more how you pair the cold, to heat, contrast therapy. And if you want to learn more about Sweat Tent, check out our dedicated review. I'm going to link it down below. There's everything you need to know, why I like the product, discount code, all of the things. So check that out. If stress reduction is your primary goal, then again, timing doesn't really matter in the sense of what time of the day it is, but what does matter is that you maybe don't do it when you're already maxed out with your body's ability to handle stress. So maybe on a day where you're already incredibly stressed out because of work, because of kids, whatever, adding on then cold plunge might not be the best approach. And again, there is a lot of context and nuance, because men tend to handle those situations, that stress overload, a little bit better than women. So for women, that extra stress then can lead to your body hanging on to fat tissue. Your body may be storing more fat tissue and growing fat tissue because the body is just storing nutrients because to respond to that stress, because you think that stress might stay around for a little bit longer. And so again, it depends a little bit, and it also depends on how you perceive the stress. If you're fairly robust to stress, and if your ability to handle stress is good, getting into the cold plunge on a day you're already stressed out might actually be beneficial, because it allows you to slow down, focus on your breathing, and all of those things can really help you better cope with stress and reduce your stress levels. But if you're not very good at handling stress yet, then I would reserve my cold plunge for a day where your stress levels are generally lower. So you really have to listen to yourself and know yourself to decide whether cold plunging on days when you're already maxed out is a good idea, or if it's gonna backfire. If you want to be on the safe side, just don't cold plunge when you're super stressed, and leave it for a day or a time when your stress levels appear to be much more manageable or maybe non-existent on a day. And then the last thing we want to talk about is to reduce inflammation. That's one of the core benefits of cold plunging, is it reduces inflammation. And so if you suffer from some sort of chronic inflammation, maybe due to an injury, due to poor lifestyle choices, poor diet, whatever, then cold plunging you can really do anytime to reduce inflammation systemically. There is a nuance to that, and we talked about this in another video. You don't want to reduce inflammation that is the response of certain types of exercise, like weightlifting. If you lift weights in order to gain more muscle tissue, you need inflammation to repair muscle tissue. Repair is an inflammatory response. You don't want to blunt this. And so I would not necessarily recommend plunging right after an intense weightlifting session that had the goal to grow your muscle tissue. But if it's any other type of inflammation, maybe due to disease, due to injury, what have you, then by all means jump in and do it anytime. There is not really a better time of the day that I'm aware of that can help you reduce inflammation, again with the exception of post-workout induced inflammation. That's something you want to just have happen without you negatively impacting it. With that, we're gonna wrap it up. Overall, I would say that while timing is important, or can be important, consistency is arguably more important in the long run. Yes, you can make certain mistakes by maybe cold plunging it in ice cold water for 10 minutes right before going to bed, and then realizing you can't fall asleep because of your body's response to the cold. Yes, there are certain things that you should avoid and can avoid, but overall, unless you take it to the extreme, cold plunging consistently, doing it is better than saying, nah, now is not the right time, so I'd rather not do it, because that can easily get into a pattern where you then end up not cold plunging for weeks and weeks in a row, and then you're not gonna get any of the benefits. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Again, let me know in the comments, how do you approach cold plunging? When do you cold plunge? When is your favorite time of the day? And have you learned something in this video that might make you adjust your timing? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe, stick around, send this video to someone who could use it. And again, thanks to our sponsors, Wet Tent, for supporting this video. Until next time.